You set the gold standard for your business. Your website should do the same. Wix puts you at the helm, so you can enjoy the creative freedom of designing your site just the way you want. Want someone to bounce your ideas off? Talk with AI to create a beautiful site together. Whatever your business, manage it from one place and tie it all together with a personalized domain name. Gear up for success with a brand that says you best. You can do it yourself on Wix.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like aloe or skins, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. With Shop Pay, that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts are going abandoned and way more sales happening. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell whatever your customers are scrolling or strolling on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Skins uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Westwood1, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/Westwood1 to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/Westwood1.
Hello and welcome to this special instant reaction edition of Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden checking in to discuss the Orioles announcement on Saturday. They have fired Brandon Hyde as their manager. The move came amid a very disappointing start to the season and after the Orioles dropped their series opener at Camden Yards against the Washington Nationals on Friday night. With that loss, the Orioles dropped to 15-28 on the season and are firmly in the basement of the American League East. I'm going to talk about the decision to move on from Brandon Hyde, as well as the subsequent move to appoint Tony Mansolino as interim manager and what that could mean for the Orioles for the rest of 2025 and beyond. I will just say at the onset here, though, that Bob and Nick were unavailable to join me at this time, but we wanted to make sure that we got something out on the heels of this news. They will join me on Monday night, and we'll have a fuller reaction to this at this time. But for now, I will break down the basics of what happened here on Saturday. The Orioles' struggles at this point are very resounding and very well documented, as are the reasons why this team has underperformed in the early going of the 2025 season. Some of that is because of injury, but that doesn't account for everything. The pitching staff has really struggled, especially the starting rotation. And a few hitters, and in particular some guys that I think the Orioles were counting on big years from, have gotten off to bad starts. Adley Rutschman is one that I know we've discussed a lot on this show, but it's not just him. Ryan Mountcastle has not performed well. Cedric Mullins, after a hot start to the season, has cooled off quite a bit. Gunnar Henderson has had his moments, but is also striking out at a high rate. So there have been a lot of issues with this team. And we saw a little bit of everything in that loss to the Nationals on Friday night when it comes to this offense, because while they out-hit the Nationals by 9 hits in that game, they scored just 3 runs and could not pull through in a 1-run loss. On the heels of that, the Orioles decide to move on from Brandon Hyde. Now, as recently as a few weeks ago, Mike Elias had given Brandon Hyde some public support and what seemed to be a vote of confidence, but I think we also knew that if things continued to get worse and the Orioles felt like they had to do something to salvage this season, that letting go of Hyde could be on the table. And indeed, after a bad April, the Orioles have actually taken a big step backwards here in the month of May. They went 9-16 in April, and so far through their first 13 games in the month of May, they are 3-10, which is good for a .231 winning percentage. They've been outscored 65-39 in that time period, showing the struggles that they're having both offensively with the pitching staff to this point in the year. Now, there's going to be a lot of discussion here in the next few weeks, regardless of what direction that the Orioles take, of whether or not Brandon Hyde really was the issue. If they perform well and they seem to start going in the right direction, let's say by the All-Star break, you're going to hear a lot of discourse about how Hyde was the problem. If things just don't turn around for whatever reason, or they don't turn around in the dramatic fashion that I think some fans are hoping for, and I'm increasingly not counting on, it's going to be, well, Hyde was the scapegoat. So we have a lot of time to get to that answer. And honestly, we're probably never going to have a clear cut answer. So I just want to take a moment to discuss what Brandon Hyde has done for the Orioles over his time in Baltimore. He was brought in along with Mike Elias in 2019. And after some rough years early on, managed to successfully bring this team from the rebuild stage into competitive baseball, beginning with that 83-79 finish in 2022, where the Orioles not only saw some of the players that had been around for a few years come into their own, mainly Anthony Santander is one of them, but Adley Rutschman made a successful debut. Kyle Bradis, after some early struggles, looked like a very quality starting pitcher down the stretch for that team. That would carry over into his great 2023 season. And in 2023, this was indeed the high mark of the Brandon Hyde era in Baltimore. 101 wins, AL East title that unfortunately ended in a quick playoff loss. But with the young core that the Orioles had in place, there were a lot of reasons to be optimistic about the future. And before the 2024 season, the Orioles go out, they acquire Corbin Burnes. And even with Kyle Bradis missing some time with injury and ultimately requiring Tommy John surgery in the middle of the 2024 season, things start out well for the Orioles. And you go back to just late June of last year, and not only did it feel like this team had a real possibility of repeating in the American League East, despite some very tough competition from the Yankees, it felt like they could pull through as one of the favorites in the American League because they had high-powered offense headlined by a player who, for the first few months of the season, looked like a legitimate MVP candidate in Gunnar Henderson, and Adley Rutschman right behind him, hitting about as well as he ever had. You had Burnes at the top of the rotation. Grayson Rodriguez was pitching well behind him. But then, starting in late June of last year, things kind of went south. They ended up going 42-46 after June 21st of last year and finished the season 91-71. That was good for the first wild card spot, but it led to yet another disappointing postseason exit as they were swept at the hands of the Kansas City Royals in 2 games in the wild card round. Go into the offseason, I think it was clear that the Orioles needed to make some moves to at least maintain the level of success they had had to this point. They brought in Tyler O'Neill to replace Anthony Santander. They tried to solidify the middle of the rotation with moves like Tomoyuki Sagano and Charlie Morton, even without replacing Corbin Burnes at the top of the rotation. Then along the way, the Orioles get hit with some injuries, and then some of those moves just don't pan out. Charlie Morton has been awful to this point in the year. I don't really feel the need to rehash that today. Tyler O'Neill has been very up and down at the plate and has already missed some time with injury. And on top of that, they've had to rely on some players that I think they weren't expecting to have to use this much this early in the season, mainly Cade Povich in the rotation. You go back to spring training, the expectation was that Povich was going to be nice AAA depth for you. But then Grayson Rodriguez gets hurt. Albert Suarez has kind of a disappointing spring and then gets hurt himself early in the regular season. Now all of a sudden, Povich is thrust into the rotation. So it's not the entire reason the Orioles have struggled, but all of these things led up to this, which is the Orioles now sitting here at 15-28 with Brandon Hyde out as manager. Now, there's a lot of ways that we could look at the Hyde era, and I know that years from now, we're going to look back on Brandon Hyde a lot more fondly than we are right now because history tends to be kind in these situations. But a lot of fans have been calling for Hyde to be dismissed. And it's something we have talked about a lot on the show, and it's unfortunate that Bob cannot be here because I think of the 3 of us, Bob felt the strongest about now being the time to move on from Hyde. I will say this for myself, which is that it has gotten increasingly hard in baseball to evaluate managers because we know how much of the sport is driven by front offices. And indeed, some of the elite organizations around the game are front office driven. And the Orioles, up until recently, were heading into that category of teams that had very strong front offices that were armed with a lot of data that seemed to be ahead of the curve of other clubs, that was helping them find ways to win at the major league level, and that was helping them to be successful. What all of that doesn't account for, and what I am left questioning is, what was the mood in the clubhouse over the last year? Because something just looked off with this team in the second half of last year. When they were behind, and you would flash to the dugout, or you would see the expressions of players after something went wrong, you could just tell they were defeated. And that was not something that I wanted to focus on a lot during the second half of last year, because I didn't want to play armchair psychologist, and not to mention there were some ebbs and flows along the way where you kept thinking, okay, this just happened. So for instance, that grand slam Anthony Santander hit against the Astros in August of last year felt like a moment where they would snap out of it. But then they wouldn't, and then they'd rally a little bit, and then they'd struggle again. So this kind of rise and fall made it difficult to assess how much of this is the players themselves struggling, how much this is Brandon Hyde not being able to get the message through to them. So that's kind of what I want to talk about here to wrap this up before we move on to Tony Mansolino. One thing that I've increasingly questioned about the Orioles over the last year has been, why are young players who are so successful in the minor leagues not establishing themselves in the majors the way that we would hope? Jackson Holliday is now finally starting to do it, but it took until really April for us to start to see the best version of him, or something close to what will be the best version of him in the major leagues. Cade Povich, I know a lot of people aren't sold on him as a major league starter, but you have to admit that when Povich is on, he looks like at least a serviceable back of the rotation arm. The problem has been so far that from start to start, you can't find any consistency. And Kobe Mayo has now struggled through 2 turns in the major leagues. And one thing that has kind of been in my mind with Hyde is, does he have a harder time connecting to the players that are coming up through the farm system than he did to the younger players who were in the major leagues or close to the major leagues when he first got the job a few years ago? So, in other words, maybe he was able to connect with Cedric Mullins, Austin Hayes, Anthony Santander in a way that he has not been able to connect with some of the players that have come up in the last year or two. That doesn't mean out of hand that he's a bad manager, but it would explain a lot of the struggles that this team has had. Because not only are we seeing players come up from the minor leagues and struggle, but it also just feels like some of the younger players that had been in the major leagues for a couple of years have either sort of flattened off in their development or are regressing, which seems to be the case with Adley Rutschman. So you have to wonder, is there a communication issue? Is there just something amiss in the clubhouse, and how much of that is Brandon Hyde's fault? I don't think we're ever going to know. Truth be told, I wish Brandon Hyde well. I think that he did a lot for this organization, and I'm pretty confident that he's going to get another chance to manage at some point down the line. Someone who has been a manager the year before, that has led a team to over 100 wins and a division title in a very competitive division, by the way, does not come along as a managerial choice very often, especially managers that have had kind of success recently. So we have not seen the last of Brandon Hyde as a manager. I'm pretty confident in that. But I do think that for the Orioles, a move had to be made. Something had to send a jolt into this clubhouse. And either it was, okay, there are issues, we hear you, we're going to fix it, or look, no one is safe now. We are underperforming. There's a lot of players who are not playing up to the standards that we have set for them, that their past performances have set for them. And I even think it's a little bit of a jolt for Mike Elias. I'm sure that this was his decision, and I have defended Mike Elias on a lot of instances, but I can concede the point that he did not act with enough urgency this offseason. I don't think that it would have made a significant difference. I think if you had Corbin Burnes here right now, he would be a decent starting pitcher on a bad team. I think that if you had traded for Kyle Tucker, it might have made a little bit of a difference if everybody else was healthy. But again, he would just be a nice bat on a bad team. But I think we know that going forward, the process has to evolve a little bit with Elias, where you either have to make sure that you have a manager in place who's getting the most out of your young players in order for them to be successful, or you have to realize that everybody coming through the farm system is not going to click at once, and you have to do a better job of acquiring veterans to supplement this roster. There's no doubt that Adley Rutzman and Gunnar Henderson are going to be the building blocks for this team as long as they are here. I hope that this time next year we're talking about Samuel Basayo in the same way, and hopefully Kobe Mayo as well. But you have to start supplementing this roster a little bit better going forward. I don't think, contrary to what some people believe, that this means that Elias is necessarily going to be on the hot seat. That's something we addressed recently. But I will say that it signals that the process for building this roster and the process for getting the most out of players at the major league level is to evolve. And it starts with this decision to move on from Brandon Hyde.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Do Crohn's disease symptoms keep coming back? Tremfya guselkumab may help. At 12 weeks, rapid symptom remission was achieved in most patients taking Tremfya, and some experienced visible improvement of their intestinal lining at 12 weeks and 1 year. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active Crohn's disease. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections and liver problems may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Explore what's possible and ask your doctor about Tremfya today. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more or visit tremfyaradio.com.
McCrispy strips are now at McDonald's. Tender, juicy, and its own sauce. Would you look at that? Well, you can't see it, but trust me, it looks delicious. New McCrispy strips, now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Back so soon? Oh no, what happened?
A little incident at the dog park. We gotta head to the vet.
Oh, not again. These bills.
We can use CashNet USA. We can apply in minutes, get a fast decision, and have the money in the account as soon as the same business day. All right, Cheddar, back in the car.
When you need money fast, be the hero. All loans subject to lender approval. Speed of funding is subject to verifications and your bank's processing times. See CashNetUSA.com for more details.
Taking over for Brandon Hyde as manager is Tony Mansolino, who's been named interim manager of the Orioles. Mansolino is a name that is very familiar to Orioles fans at this point, as he has been the third base coach for the team since 2021. He came over to the Orioles with years of experience in Cleveland's organization. He was with them from 2011 to 2020, including 4 seasons as manager with Low-A Lake County, High-A Lynchburg, Double-A Akron, and Triple-A Columbus. That was in 2016 through 2019. And then in 2020, he served as interim third base coach for the big league team, while then manager Terry Francona stepped away from the club for health reasons. Mansolino, we have not had a chance, the three of us, to learn a ton about him outside of what has been reported by Orioles beat writers over the years. One thing that has stood out in the reporting to me is that it seems like Mansolino is a very strong communicator. You can find some examples of this around the internet, but I want to point back to a piece that Andy Koska wrote in April of 2024, talking about how Mansolino had been working with Gunnar Henderson on his footwork and how a drill they had done with a flat glove had been really key to getting Henderson to show better footwork at shortstop, which helped make his throws more accurate, among other things. And this is a tidbit from the article that I found interesting. I wanted to pull it out now, and this is quoting directly from Andy. At the beginning of spring training, 2024, by the way, Mansolino consulted a large Microsoft Word document he keeps on his computer that outlines the minor details he hopes to work on with infielders. In that document are also training techniques. So clearly, this is someone who is very prepared in the way that he goes about working with players. And from what we can tell, it seems like his communication skills are fairly strong. Now, it's a lot different working with infielders compared to a whole roster, but There are possibly some traits, if you read into that the Orioles like in Mansolino, and he'll get an opportunity here to show what he can do. That doesn't mean that I necessarily think he's a long-term guy, because I think the Orioles do have a couple of major league managerial prospects on their coaching staff now. Buck Britton is someone we have talked about extensively. He has done great work in the player development system. We have heard from multiple players over the years, as well as members of the front office, about how good Britton is at handling a clubhouse and communicating with players. And then you have Robinson Chirinos right now, who remains as the team's bench coach. Chirinos, to me, kind of feels like someone in the Alex Cora mold, where highly respected as a player. Most people around the game believe that he will be a manager one day, and it's just a matter of the right time and place coming up for him. It might be in Baltimore, it might not be, but I feel pretty confident that, much like with Buck Britton, Chirinos is going to get his chance to manage one day. So it is possible that one of those two ends up getting the job down the line. It's possible that after this season, the Orioles decide to go externally, or, as I think Orioles fans really should be rooting for right now, Tony Mansolino is successful the rest of the way this season, and that puts him in the conversation for the job. There's obviously a lot of baseball left to be played, and things can go in any number of directions. The Orioles could get a lot better and have a turnaround that is reminiscent of last year's Astros or the Phillies of 2022, or it could be that this sort of tailspin that we are in continues, or they find a way to get a little bit better, but just don't get all the way back to what we thought they were going to be in 2025, which is a playoff team. Speaking of expectations the rest of the way, I think that makes for a good segue into our final segment, Last Call, brought to you by Checker Spot Brewing. Located at 1421 Ridgely Street, Checker Spot is not far from Camden Yards, making it the perfect place for a pre- or post-game drink. And while you're at Camden Yards this season, check out the beer stand behind home plate, where you can get one of their signature beers, the Bird is a Word. And I will say, as an aside, I was there on Friday night, and I managed to get a very good Pilsner from Checker Spot at the beer stand by third base. So it's another option if you're looking for a drink at the game this weekend. Regardless, though, whether it's at Camden Yards or over at their brewery, be sure to head over to Checker Spot soon or get one of their beers at the ballpark. Now, this is where I would normally throw out a prompt or a question to Bob or Nick, and the three of us would discuss it, and we would wrap up the show. But because they are not here today, I'm going to take a little bit different approach and put this one out to the listener, which is this question. What does success look like for the Orioles the rest of the way in 2025? In other words, what is your definition of success for the rest of this season? Do you still think that the Orioles can make the playoffs, and is that your measure of success? Have you completely given up hope? Or do you think that there's maybe some middle ground where the Orioles won't make the postseason and perhaps don't even finish above 500, but manage to play more competitive baseball over the last few months of this season and look a little bit better going into 2026? So let us know what your definition of success is by letting us know either in our comments on social media. And by the way, we have many social media channels, which I'll get into in a moment. Or if you are in our Discord, drop a comment in the episode discussion section and let us know, what does success look like to you the rest of the way? And by the way, if you're a member of our Patreon community, is not in Discord, feel free to leave a comment on the post for this episode. And with that, that does it for this special edition of Orioles on the Verge. Thanks for hanging in there with me today as I fly solo through this episode. Bob and Nick are going to be back with me on Monday night, and we're going to be joined by Steve Molesky. Now, we had reached out to Steve yesterday, and our plan for the show was much different originally. We were going to kind of rehash some of the same topics we discussed with John Mioli last week, but get Steve's perspective on them. Turns out now we have to blow up that script because we're going to have to get his reaction to the Orioles' decision to dismiss Brandon Hyde, and we'll hear from Bob and Nick as well. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X. We're also on TikTok and on YouTube, and you can find us at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to our Patreon community and sign up to become a member today at the $3, $5, or $10 levels. To have bonus weekly coverage from Bob, Nick, and myself, as well as monthly updates to our top 50 prospects list. Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, part of the Believe Podcast Network.
For more than 50 years, National University has been a military-friendly, yellow ribbon school that understands the importance of honor and commitment. With 4- and 8-week classes available, year-round enrollment, and more than 190 programs to choose from, we help veterans just like you define the next chapter of their careers. Learn more at nu.edu. That's nu.edu.